all, thank you so much for having me. And I'm really glad that, I used to think that I write for the print and mostly, I don't get reviews, especially from students or archaeologists. I hardly get any reviews, like rarely anybody texts me or, good or bad, anything. I hardly get to hear anything about my columns. And the last week's column in particular, particularly was very difficult column for me to write. It was something I have not written so far. I have usually based my writing on a particular site, a particular, archaeological research question. But this particular topic was very, very important to me. Personally, also because, I have asked these questions myself while I was, working, and I still do. As I still ask these questions, and we need to have more discussions around these particular questions rather than just always focusing on the findings, the material, and all of those things. Like, we need to really start bringing these questions on the table so we get answers, because truth be told, with a lot of discoveries and lot of development, there's a lot of mess that also have been created, which needs to be clean, and we need, all of us need to be together in some way or the other to do that. I remember I had written a previous column on Kotla Barli, and the column was basically on dairy processing. And more than dairy processing, the column was about telling people that Harappan civilization is not about urban cities, right? It have small settlements which are agro-pastoralists also in nature, especially in Gujarat. Because if you look at Gujarat's ecology, it's very different from other parts, of the country. It's very different even today. You see the food habits, the clothes, the kind of, dresses people wear, everything is quite different. And the reason is because the ecology is different. And within Gujarat, there is Saurashtra, there is Kutch, there's Gujarat, the area which connects to Madhya Pradesh. So in different micro ecological zones, the culture is also distinct, right? And that is sort of many times is reflected in archaeological data and archaeological material. But we don't talk about this, and especially we don't talk about this in public. People, when outsiders, the non-archaeologists, those who are enthusiasts or whatever, the moment they hear the term Harappan or Indus Valley civilization, they think about the big cities. They don't think about the smaller settlements. They don't even know that Harappan civilization or the Indus Valley civilization was not constitute of all big cities. There are only major 5 cities. Other than that, we have rural settlements, agro-pastoralist settlements. We also have industrial centers as well, right? Ports. So this diversity within one civilization is never talked about. Also, people don't know usually that people talk about the transition from early to mature Harappan, but rarely any side, or people rarely give emphasis to a side like Kotla Barli, which is dated to a time period which is hardly studied, in isolation, to 2300 to 1900. That is a transition phase from mature to late. What is happening during that period, that this is where deurbanization is slowly taking place, right? And it's a very small settlement. So the emphasis of that particular column was in that, and it sparked debate. And I usually refrain myself from commenting on Twitter comments or anything, but I noticed one particular thread, a conversation happening. Few people were arguing with each other, and they started talking about painted Grayware. And this one girl who said, painted Grayware civilization. And then the other one replied and said, how can you call it a civilization when there is nothing but painted Grayware? And you know what? I'm just reading these tweets and I'm wondering, it's true. It is not a civilization. I will not call it a civilization because I'm an archaeologist. She's made a mistake by calling it a civilization, but it's true. She raised a very valid point. What are other important things other than the painted Grayware? What is, like, it's not a civilization, like we cannot term it as civilization, but as an archaeological culture, what other things are other than that particular marker pottery, what other things set that particular time period apart from its contemporary time period? Just one pottery, right? So that is why I thought I'll write this particular column, and it was not easy for me to write because to convey certain ideas in public is always difficult. So yeah, so that was my thought. So today I'll be basically talking about all of those aspects that are discussed in my column, but in a more not detail, but in archaeological terms, because I'm talking to archaeologists right now. So I will talk more in archaeological terms, and I hope we have a lot of discussion because that is the point of that column, and that is the point of bringing these issues, on the table. So I'll share my screen now. So one of the most important questions that I always ask a lot of the students that I meet on site, or students who are training with me in field, and especially when we are discussing or starting to discuss and learn about archaeology, we really need to understand what is culture. So a lot of you will have an answer. If any one of you want to volunteer and tell me exactly what you think is a culture, can anyone just unmute and just give an answer? What is a culture? What, according to what is culture? Does anyone have any answer?
Ma'am, can I try?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Ma'am, I think if you're speaking generally, culture is an overall term to describe not only the materials used, but also the practices, the ideologies, the social exchanges of a particular community that makes it distinct.
Yeah, so that is one aspect of culture, which is in anthropological term is what exactly is defined as culture. Culture is basically everything, from where our morals, our ideas, our traditions. Usually people just link to traditions and rituals as culture, but culture is way broader than that. It's a very, very broad concept. And culture, in archaeological term, is of course very different, but in general term also, culture is very diverse, and there is not one definition which can actually define culture. For me, I have a different way of looking at culture, which I'll discuss as we go forward. So culture, E.B. Taylor was the first one who attempted to define culture. And according to him, culture was everything. It was belief, morals, laws, customs, or any other thing. And its manifestation also in form of art, architecture, everything, in any habit also the man has acquired. That is what culture, right? That's how he defined culture, and it's a very complex phenomenon. It's not easy to pinpoint or define what culture is. Another very important definition is that culture is a man-made part of environment, and for me this definition is very interesting, because it suggests that culture is what man makes of an environment, right? So in some, total culture is basically an adaptive behavior. I remember when I was a student, and it was a first class, and we were discussing about archaeological thought and the purpose of archaeology, and in that we were discussing culture. And that's where we our teacher gave us a very simple definition of culture. He said that the culture is nothing but learned behavior and adaptive behavior. Man, the way man learns to live in order to exist, in order to survive, and all of that he pass on to the next generation as inheritance. All of that is culture. Now here is in you if you look at the image carefully, Here is environment, you have ecology, social pattern, material culture, which is an important archaeological data, and then you have religious practices. Now look at the arrow. Everything somewhere or the other is interlinked, right? Nothing is in isolation. Everything is sort of connected in some way or the other. And the reason is because our environment shapes us. Our survival skills is what, we develop these adaptive behaviors, and then we manifest them in intangible and tangible form. Now, for instance, I was talking about Gujarat, right? And I've been living in Gujarat for 4 years now, and I'm from Delhi. But when I moved to Gujarat, I found, in the grocery shop, I had gone to just buy general stuff for the kitchen, and I saw peanut oil, packets of peanut oil, and cotton seed oil. And as a Punjabi, who uses mustard and ghee, and at times refined oil, for me to see at least cotton seed oil was little, was not my culture trait. It was a different culture trait. And when I started living in Gujarat, and I started interacting with the Gujaratis, I found that this is what they have been consuming. And the reason is because peanut and cotton is grown in large quantity in Gujarat because of its ecological conditions. Mustard is not grown here, right? Mustard is basically a crop which is grown in northern context, is grown in Punjab, Haryana, and the neighboring regions. So there, mustard oil is used it's in abundance, so it's used naturally in cooking and otherwise as well. And similarly goes for other oils as well. You have coconut oil in southern India also, because of the availability of raw material that becomes part of your cultural trait, right? It's very difficult now. I am married to a Gujarati family. It's very difficult for me to make my Gujarati family switch to mustard. They have bought a bottle of mustard oil because I am used to cooking in mustard, and they're used to cooking in peanut oil. But you look at this, it's very difficult for me. They pick up the smell, which I usually don't, because I have always consumed food cooked in mustard oil, and they have not. So they pick up that that mustard smell, and then they don't want to have it, and it's sort of like an uphill battle. But this is what cultural identity does to us. So we are not wearing a tag which says that we consume food made in this type of oil, or peanut oil, mustard oil, whatever. But this adaptive sort of day to day behavior that we have adapted, and that has been passed on from a one generation to the other, is what culture is all about, right? There's a lot of it's just one part. I'm talking about food. Now come, if we talk about the way we dress, again, it's all managed by environment. And then it is about how much, what kind of crop is grown in that particular zone, and then what you are, if there is surplus, what you are exporting, trade, then religious pattern, everything is sort of interlinked, and that is what culture is. Now culture, as we've already mentioned, and one of you have also suggested, that culture is not just material culture, the culture we study in archaeology, it also intangible, right? So for instance, mustard oil, the food is cooked and eaten in mustard or peanut oil. But what are the material remain that we'll find in archaeological data, right? If we have to dig a particular site, we'll find archaeobotanical data, right? We'll find lipid analysis when we look at the pottery, and when we do a scientific analysis, we will find out traces of oil. So archaeology is basically a study of everything, and the remains, the manifestation of the intangible, also intangible form, and that is left to us. That is what we do, right? We study all of that, not only just objects. As an archaeologist, we don't look at just object in isolation. We try to look at an object, and we try to see, not just, it's a pretty figurine, but where is the provenance, where what is the source of raw material of this particular object, right? how it was transferred or transported from point A to point B, and when it reached the production unit, how it was manufactured and shaped into this final object, which was then used by a particular society in that particular context that has been excavated, and then how it was left behind in what particular context, and then when we retrieve it. So our we basically, what we try to do in archaeology, we try to trace the whole journey of that particular object, right from inception, procurement of raw material, manufacturing, use, the entire life of an object till we find it. And then again also post excavation also, the object is still under research, it goes into museum, etc. So archaeological data is not just limited to object. That's what I mean. We study material remains, but in a beyond. We also try to go beyond material culture. Now, this is just what I was talking about. We always ask ourselves, why this particular object was made, what was the reason why it was made, what was the material when it was made, relative dating or absolute dating, how it was made, in even in pottery or any object, and and what was its utility and what was its end result, right? So it is basically archaeological data. It's not just one object or multiple objects, it's just very diverse, right? So just look at the intangible data here. We all know this, right? Dancing could be a form of intangible data. Rituals could be form of intangible data. But I want to ask you, these are intangible data. Can you give me an example of a tangible data for dance or for marriage ritual? What will be the material remain in this particular example? Can somebody volunteer and tell me?
Can I say?
Yeah, sure.
So if you're talking about marriage, then maybe a specific ornament that is given by the mother-in-law to the bride or the husband to the bride would be a object associated with it.
Yeah, that also. And also, if you see marriage, it's a ritual, right? So in ritual, you have a lot of objects that we use, right? There's a
Yes.
lot of, you give a lot of offering. There's a fire pit, and then you have that also, the which is ko havan kund bolte hai, and that you take char sat fere or whatever you take, and then there's this fire pit at the center, right? So
Yes.
fire, you can't trace, but if you find that feature, that is one part also of tangible data. And also other ritual objects used in performing marriage ritual also. And subsequently, of course, if you find jewelry, etc., all of that will be manifested in from tangible to intangible to tangible. And that's what we find in archaeological data. Can you anyone give an example of this image of a girl dancing?
Ma'am, can I try?
Yeah, sure.
Yes, so if you have to talk about tangible data in terms of dance, then the clothes that are used, the ornamentation, in India we can take the ghungru and the other ornaments that it is also diverse in nature. What we use in South India is totally different from that, the one that we wear in North. And if we have to speak archaeological remains, and what are the tangible data that we have for these two, this one. For example, if we talk about marriage, I believe the Girija Kalyana, the sculptures that we see in temples of
Yeah.
Shiva and
Yeah.
Parvati. And in dance also, we have a lot of Natya Saraswati or any kind of
Yeah.
dancing, this one. So those also become a type of tangible data, as well as
Exactly.
intangible also.
Yes, exactly. So this is what people don't usually understand this. So like the non-archaeologists don't understand this. So we are not just dealing with the sculpture, we are not just dealing with an object, we're trying to derive an understanding of the society, we're trying to reach to the intangible, which is not visible to us in physical form. We cannot touch, we cannot see. So absolutely, I'm happy that nobody said dancing girl. I'm really happy. God bless you all. So this is what material culture is all about. Right now in the center, there is a photo of a burial. This is a burial from a site of Rakhi Gadi. And here you can see that, a particular, the body, the skeleton is at the center, and then there's plethora of pottery, which is, here kept in particular fashion, in one particular fashion. Now here also, intangible is manifested into tangible. Now when this person had died and then the grave was dug to bury this person, they must have performed a lot of rituals. There must be a lot of, we don't know exactly what, we cannot pinpoint exactly what it would have been, but there must have been some practice, or some, just even if not religious, or other sort of practice, just the plain simple digging out of a pit and then burying somebody. And then if you put so many parts in a one particular very similar fashion, you have to understand that there has to be some system in place, right? Which we cannot write in a proper, we don't know definitely what exactly it was. We cannot reach to a particular, a conclusion, but we can try to understand. We can do a lot of scientific analysis on this particular pit and try to bring out the whole story. So archaeological work is diverse, and it's not just looking at particular, objects, as I've mentioned. And another thing, there is this Dholavira reservoir. Now, I'm sure you all know that reservoirs are, these are rock cut reservoirs, right? They have cut into natural sediment, which is rock. And imagine they, can anyone just try to imagine? They must have used stone tools as well as, metal tools, because but again, if you understand metallurgy, copper is not that great of a metal to do such a big job, right? So stone tools must have been used in this regards to construct such big stone cut reservoirs at Dholavira. And there are not one, two, but many, around 16 reservoirs cut around the entire settlement. Now, this is another example. You have one archaeological form of archaeological data, which is the terracotta plough from Banavali. Other side, you have the furrow marks from Kalibanga. So in both contexts, you find a different form of archaeological data, but both together, or even if you look at separately, site-wise also, just trying to tell us the agriculture practices, trying to tell us the, what was the shape of their plow and what was the agriculture practices, and then combined with archaeozoological data, faunal remains, etc., we will have a whole holistic picture of the practices that were undertaken by ancient societies. Now, this is a very, I really like this. This is Binford's, in one of his books. Now, this is what, we are. This is what present is. This is past, and in between there is a gap. And what we are basically trying to do, we are excavating trenches and we are trying to reconstruct this. We, with the help of archaeological data, scientific data, we try to bridge the gap between the two, right? Now, I have explained what archaeological culture is in a way, just one part of it, right? I've just told you what culture is. Now we have to come to a civilization, because truly culture and civilization are often used as each other synonyms. People I don't know if they make a mistake or it's just become an habit, or they think the moment they say culture, civilization, it means culture, or if they say culture, it means civilization. But it is not true, because civilization is a different concept. Anthropologically, civilization is defined by urban centers. First and foremost, there are various characteristics. It's where when there is a surplus of food, there is a division in society, where there is writing, there is art and architecture. That is what civilization is. But the problem with this term civilization came when, now a lot of people people don't want to use the term civilization. A lot of us, including me to an extent, think the term civilization is sort of putting, the moment you hear civilization, you think a culture which is, much more evolved, better than the other contemporary cultures. That's what it has been presented to us, right? It has been taught to us for generations that the moment you find, if there is a civilization, means it's better than the other contemporary cultures, because civilizations means urban cities, drainage system, writing, art, this and that. And the problem basically started in 1880s when American anthropologists gave this three-step evolutionary sequence of a society. He suggested that there is savagery, barbarism, and then civilization. We know now that this does not exist. But what problem that continued for a long period of time and still is, that we always try to look at our culture in an evolutionary sequence way. We do not look at in savagery, barbarism, or civilizational way per se now after a new archaeology. And the purpose of new archaeology is basically bring us out of this mindset of evolutionary sequence. Also, we often go back to this particular, this mindset that everything is linear. There has to be a primitive form of society, and then there is this sort of society, and then you have civilization, and then civilization, urban, there's deurbanization, and then there's again urbanization. We really need to understand that, yes, in the context of Indian subcontinent, and also world, in terms of world archaeological context, there are certain civilizations, and there is a reason why they have called civilization, but it is not to prove this, right? And I explain further as well. So these are various characteristics which I have already mentioned. Population size, complex institutions, technology, developed culture, all of that. Now, in Indian subcontinent, the context, in India, we have Harappan or Harappan civilization, which came into limelight after the excavation of Harappa and Mohenjo-daro. So back when when Harappa was excavated in 1920s, and followed by the excavation of Mohenjo-daro, and when finally in 1924, when Marshall, disclosed to the world that they have uncovered an unknown civilization of the world, they basically were pointing out to they wanted to place a particular culture contemporary to the other ancient civilizations, Mesopotamian and Egyptian civilizations. And but after over a century of research in within the realm of Harappan civilization, we know that there are some characteristic features which do fit in this particular definition of civilization. For instance, there is town planning, there are urban centers, there's drainage, there is art, architecture, there is writing. There has to be some form of traditions we are not able to pinpoint correctly, or we have not reached a particular conclusion, but there has to be some sort of traditions and ritual practices. There is trade, there's surplus of food. But we have, people have missed out in pointing out that civilization is not just that. Civilization is this diversity that you find even today. That there is not just urban cities where there is town planning. There are also settlements which might not follow the traditional Harappan or typical Harappan town planning, but will have cultural traits. Often we do not try to trace the cultural traits. Now, what is cultural traits? Cultural traits are small, um, you know, uh, parameters or features within the culture or material culture that you pick up, which together form a cultural complex, right? For instance, pottery, the drawing of pottery type or pottery, maybe carnelian beads, the seal. These are cultural traits that have connected different settlements, which are not only urban, which are semi-urban, rural, agro-pastoralists, industrial centers, all of them together in that character in the umbrella of Harappan civilization. And the reason why it is now, we have this complex matrix or different type of settlement is because of the cultural trait. So in reality, it is not the civilization or what Morgan has initially propounded in 80s and what usually has sort of carry forward in the public domain. It is not for civilization. It is the culture and these cultural traits which become the cultural complex which form the civilization, right? But here is another question, and here is another part of archaeological cultures. This is just the conversation around the Harappan civilization. What about the contemporary cultures? How are we going to put them? Where are we going to put them? Are all archaeological cultures which are contemporary to Harappan, which followed, succeeded the Harappan culture, are also part of a civilization? How do we term it? Right now, look at this particular chart. It's very famous, and I think you can understand here there is a food producing era, right? Which we have the earliest evidence from Hergar. We have regionalization era. Now, regionalization era is where regional characteristics starts to come up. Like you have Côte d'Ivoire, you have Nile, Amri. These sites, in Indus Plains started to develop their own regional character. A lot of early Harappan sites also develop their own characteristic features. Contemporary to this, we have around this time we have a lot of Neolithic sites also, and we have Mesolithic sites like Langnaj still existing, contemporary to early food producing era. Then comes integration era. Now, integration era is where all of these features which are similar are integrated under one umbrella. So this is what the urbanization or the mature Harappan phase is all about, right? It's an integration era. And post that, when about 2000, 1900 BCE, again, the culture shifts to a more localization era, which means again, the similar to the regionalization era, it is sort of going back to the local cultures, seamlessly sort of mixing with the local contemporary existing cultures. So instead of just looking at the civilization's evolution, it is also like preferably we can also choose this sort of evolutionary or sort of progression chart, or the terms like early food producing, regionalization, integration, and localization era. Now, I was talking about what about other, in this particular slides, are all archaeological cultures civilization. Now, we were talking about the material culture and the tangible culture. We all know that pottery play a very important role in archaeological investigation. Pottery is been termed as the ABCD of archaeology, and rightly so, because pottery is one antiquity, one type of antiquity which is which we can find in abundance on surface across the subcontinent, right? Which can sustain weathering, and can it's very difficult for us to destroy pottery, and because of that, a lot of people who don't like pottery have also called it like a it's like a nuclear waste. You just put it anywhere and it stays like that, it does not go under weathering, and it's true. So pottery, since it was it was available right on the surface, as compared to other objects, archaeologists initially, especially post 1947, have used pottery to define cultures. For instance, painted Grayware culture, NBPW culture, different cultures, BRW culture. You can go on and on and on, and you can also create your own cultures on the basis of pottery. But that was just the initial stage of study. I was just rereading Subbarao's book Personality of India, and those of you who have not read Personality of India should read. And in the introduction, he was talking about this very phenomenon. He has written the book in 1950s, but 50s, 60s, I guess. But what he was talking about, that post 1947, when India was just, a newly formed country. We were trying to understand our own archaeological culture beyond the Harappan civilization or beyond Mohenjo-daro and Harappa. We have used pottery as a marker to understand the stratigraphy of a very large area. So, for instance, this is a sort of position, a stratigraphic position of various pottery types, which will tell you a entire sequence of northern India, right? So you know that if there is later up and then early PGW, BRW, so you can sort of, yeah. So I was discussing about another aspect of archaeological culture, which is defined by pottery. We all know those cultures. You must have read about it in many 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 books. And I was reading Subbarau's Personality of India, and in the introduction itself, he says that when India, in post 1947, when we were trying to understand the stratigraphy and the chronology and the culture sequence of the country, we did try to kind of a stratigraphy, which followed the law of stratigraphy given by Mortimer Wheeler, and it was an initial step. But he said that is just a skeleton. We really need to. That was just the base skeleton, and now we need to add flesh and blood to understand the whole. The working of a human body in a way, like working of a culture. We need to do that. And how do we do it if we are still stuck on concepts propounded decades ago based on pottery? Right, like for instance, this is a chart which suggests that this is here is late Harappan. You have OCP, then you have Neolithic. Right now, we know for a fact that a lot of OCP sites predate period. We have Neolithic sites, which also, like Burzahom is a Neolithic site, which is dated to 2200 to 2100, which does not go well with this particular time frame. There is supposedly a break. We don't know exactly. A lot of sites do show break, they don't show break. Then there is this supposedly early Harappan. You have late Harappan. Late PGW, early PGW. Don't know what exactly this means. Scholars have given these big terminologies, never care to define. Now BRW, BSW, BRW is black and red ware, blue is black slip ware. They all come under Chalcolithic. Interestingly, they also come with PGW. They also come with NPPW. They also follow to some extent to Koshan. So you see is the way this particular stratigraphic chart is created. There's a lot of linear progression, right? Like with late PGW, early NPP. Now there is a site called Jaffa D, which is given a very early date of NPPW, which is 1200 BCE. I just attended a conference where a scholar from Bihar has excavated a PGW site and given a very early date, 4000, 5000, 4000 BCE. Of course, I'm not going to take that date into consideration like this. I have to take it with a pinch of salt. But we also have dates which are not as early, but they are early than what was propounded by scholars, decades ago. Now, here is the problem. You looked at painted Grayware, but you did not look at other cultural components. What are the cultural components? What are the type? What is the associated pottery? BRW, BSW go, they are contemporary to PGW. In fact, at many sites, BSW, black slipware, is pre-PGW. Now, what is the difference between painted Grayware and Grayware? I mean, I should tell you that BSW is nothing but gray pottery with black slip, right? Just the way PGW is nothing but gray pottery with painting. The shapes are also same, right? Manufacturing in terms of technological advances, PGW is little, fine in terms of its quality and fabric as compared to BSW. But even NPP also, there are many NPP shirts which are gray. And then you have a slip. So of course, NPP is separated because of the glazing. BSW accompanies NPP also. BSW go along with PGW also. BSW is contemporary to plain Grayware also. So we have not even tried to understand the ceramic assemblage in a holistic way, let alone other cultural components. Now, this is the spread of painted grayware, right? It's spread over a very, very large area. Unfortunately, not despite having so many sites, we are unable to understand what exactly are its other cultural components that are not just painted grayware. What is, if you can also tell me what is sort of redware look like, what is the kind of beads like. There's only one type of bead which is often asked in net exams also, but what beyond that? What kind of glass is found, iron is found, but in what quantity, right? Where was the source of iron? It's spread over such a large area. What was the closest source of iron? Where is the provenance study done? Are they not using any semi-precious beads? They are using agate. So agate is somewhere or the other coming from Gujarat. There has to be internal trade. So in order to even go even to define culture, we have so many gaps in the knowledge which we need to fill, and then we should think about calling them even going to an extent of terming them civilization. There is a conference happened where long back on this very concept, and a scholar propounded the term Ganga civilization. Now I understand why. Because in Ganga Plain, again, the cultures are diverse and they're all contemporary. There is no linear. There's a lot of contemporary cultures going on where you have Neo Chalcolithic also, you have other traditions also. So that we understand, but I think we need to, instead of running after civilization, like also in sense that a lot of people want to continue their culture from Harappan, or want to drag their culture from Harappan. Like for instance, PJW is always in the eastern part, whereas the western in this area is supposedly earliest, whereas this is the later PGW, right? Or any other culture with, that's why we find a lot of overlap of later Harappan and PGW. This is what the theory says, but the latest study and the dates are not going with that particular concept, or the theory. We need to also stop emphasizing on the civilization aspect of Harappan and look at the cultural aspect, and then try to see the traces of culture. Maybe then we will have answers to a lot of other questions, because truth be told, civilization is made up of cultures and not the other way around. Thank you.